Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second session of our seminar on global nutrition issues and challenges. And what we have for you today is a basic question: a planetary health diet, yes or no? We've had some adjustments to the schedule. One, Panopto was not functioning the last time, so as a result, I'll go over some of the material from last time. Then I will introduce the Eat Lancet Planetary Health Diet, and then make room for Hannah Sanders, our brilliant graduate student who just did a thesis on that very topic. And then we will have questions. So, let's begin. So, for those of you who weren't here last week, these are the course basics. Pre-reads are posted on Canvas. These are going to be reviews and video, interviews and reports, not primary scientific papers. But we have them if you want to ask and go into a given topic in greater detail. Slides are posted on Canvas. Lectures will be recorded on Panopto. It's recording right now. And then students are requested to write a brief reflection on each topic, half a page max, 1 page tops, just to show that you are looking at the concepts, integrating the concepts, and really thinking about them as you turn in the reflection. So I just want to spend a few minutes covering some of the material from the last time. Very basically, we were looking at plant versus animal proteins. Many people are misled by pretty photographs, but in fact, the plant proteins and animal proteins are well separated in this slide, which, as I said before, comes from India and from a website called Lemon8. And those are very nice examples of typical animal proteins and typical plant proteins. And the description on the right gives you not only the types of protein, but also the amounts per 100 grams. So this is actually very useful. Then we looked at the World Bank map of rich and poor countries, focusing on Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, meaning India, Southeast Asia, and parts of Latin America. And this is the point which will be coming back all the time. This map of rich and poor countries from the World Bank is pretty much the same map as the map of dietary adequacy from the FAO. So notice the poor countries on the previous slide are the ones that do not have animal products in their diet. What they have is traditional plant-based diets with grains and root crops, actually a lot of starches, and sometimes not enough variety. Those were the traditional diets of those particular regions. They're changing right now as we have nutrition transition going on in the world. And then the next point I was trying to make was this. As countries become richer, they eat more protein, and they also increase the animal to plant protein ratio. So if you look at this particular slide, which is from Our World in Data, the data actually from FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, you see that you go from Nigeria to India to Chad to South Africa, and then move up to Japan and Brazil and United Kingdom. You are going up the socioeconomic scale in terms of incomes, and you're going up in terms of protein intake, and you're going up in terms of animal protein available for human consumption. One critical thing to remember always is that the FAO data are food balance sheets. They are not technically data on consumption. Those are data on foods available for human consumption, but very often they're being used as proxies for consumption. So the point I was trying to come to was this. There's a law of economics generated or published in 1941, which says essentially this. As incomes rise in countries and sometimes within countries, people have more money and they eat better diets. To begin with, they eat more calories because their diets were inadequate in calories, but then later on what they do is they eat more expensive calories. The amount of calories stays the same, but the composition of the diet structure changes completely, and you have more animal proteins coming in, and so starchy roots and grains disappear, and people eat meat, poultry, fish, eggs, and dairy. This is not just incomes, because social factors also play a role in food choice, and that has to do with religion and culture and tradition and geographic region. So these were the data I was showing for countries in Southeast Asia. Notice Korea, where increasing incomes were associated with a gigantic increase in animal protein. And the point we were coming to for the reflection was this. This is the relationship between country incomes and the percent of animal protein in the diet, and a number of initiatives, mostly originating in high-income countries, are trying to reduce the animal-to-plant protein ratio in the global diet, which practically means this. They want to go down the vertical line, which means reduce the animal protein ratio without sacrificing income. But you see on the map here, on this graph, there is nothing there. There is no precedent for countries with high-level incomes to have a plant-based protein diet. There are no such countries. So if you want to really have a diet with low animal-to-plant protein ratio, you have to go down the horizontal line to the left. And then you come across countries such as India and China and Bangladesh and Thailand and so on. So the question is, will the well-meaning efforts to reduce the animal-to-plant protein ratios in rich countries succeed? And then will such efforts aimed at low-income countries succeed as well? So this is where the reflection came in. As incomes go up, diets change. Are we trying to reintroduce plant-based diets to low-income countries, given they just escaped those diets and are consuming more protein? So this was your reflection. You can now vote and tell me what you think. This was essentially the reflection that you were asked to do. Will those succeed? Will they not succeed? This is newfangled PowerPoint. Oh, hold on, let me go back. Sorry. I'm trying to go down to, I can't really see the answers very well because, all right, I'll share those later on, but I can't really see them too well because the screen is not projecting all the answers at the same time. But let's take a look at these. If you answered yes, what are your reasons? Very briefly. Okay, historical diet patterns, culture, tradition, the embeddedness of animal foods in human diets, not only in Europe but also elsewhere. Aspirational factors, many countries want to have those diets and they aspire to those diets. These are the major factors. Let's go to this one. If you answered no, so which means that those efforts will not succeed. What are you thinking? Yeah, economics. Yeah, culture can go both ways. You can adapt the culture at the same time. People stay with the traditional cultures as well. Okay, I'll share those with you later on, so keep working on those. I'm not closing the richness of the responses here, but you're following the economic trends very well here. So, I now want to introduce the Planetary Health Diet, because the Planetary Health Diet was an attempt by a number of people, mostly in high-income countries, to put together a single, unitary, healthy diet for the planet. So this is the Eat Lancet Commission. I posted on Canvas an interview with Walter Willett, who's standing here on the left. The person in the center is Johan Rockstrom, the head of the AT Lancet Foundation, and Gunhild Stordalen, who's a sponsor of the entire initiative, is on the right. And this was a diet which took into account the planetary boundaries and the non-sustainable nature of livestock production in our current food systems. So here, what the Commission was trying to do is put together a single diet for the planet. I will not go into the mechanics of how the modeling was done, but they were using FAO food balance sheets of the kind I just described to you, merged with WHO data on weight and health, showing that as meat consumption went up, so did a number of adverse health events. And as a result, based on those conclusions, we all ought to go back to a plant-based diet. There are a number of technological issues with this, but we will not go into those. What I will show you again is the slide I showed you last time, and that is the Planetary Health Diet is mostly largely composed of plants. So you see here the plant-based diet is grains and potatoes and vegetables and fruit, and the amount of meat is restricted to the recommended amount of meat is restricted to 7 grams of beef, 7 grams of pork, 29 grams of chicken, and 29 grams of fish. And this is from a British newspaper. They were especially upset that this translated into a fraction of a rasher of bacon, which is a part of a British breakfast. So this was the response from a British tabloid newspaper putting together this picture of the Eat Lancet diet, saying that nobody in England was really prepared to follow that. But there is more. There's actually a very interesting scientific evaluation of the Eat Lancet diet, especially with regard to its micronutrient content, protein content, and protein quality. And this was precisely the thesis of Hannah Sanders, who's right here, and she will present her data on the Eat Lancet diet and take up the question, Planetary Health Diet, yes or no. So please welcome Hannah up here. She will continue.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know that was high drama watching me get up on the stage. I know you're probably all wondering what's with the brace, what's with the crutches. So the first day of winter break, I decided to go skiing, and you all already know where this is going. I was going around, just a turn, classic, normal, not a high or steep grade, but my skis crossed, took a fall, ski came off, was sledded down by ski patrol, the whole thing. Found myself in the doctor's office with the ACL tear and meniscus tear. So I had surgery about 2.5 weeks ago, and I'm just trying to get back into things. So it's an honor to be here and to actually be on my feet, able to be with you all today and to present. So thanks for having me. So as Adam mentioned, we're going to dive into the Planetary Health Diet a little bit more and think about it in a specific context of West Africa. So we'll get to that. But this is just another visualization compared to the one that Adam just showed from the British tabloid that demonstrates what one day of eating in accordance with the Planetary Health Diet might look like. And the first thing that jumped off the page to me looking at this was the whole broccoli head, the whole pepper, thinking like, I eat my vegetables, but I'm not sure that I really eat that many vegetables. Also up in the corner we have just a little piece of the egg, a little piece of meat, just to emphasize that ratio that we're talking about of emphasis on vegetables, plant proteins, and a de-emphasis on animal source foods. So my question to you all is, how does your diet maybe align with this is how does your diet fit within the planetary food system boundaries for sustainability? And we'll also talk a little bit more about how diets at the whole food system or whole population level also fit or don't fit into that. Starting with something that I'm sure is no surprise to you is the question of, is North America consuming too much animal protein? So looking at this chart, each of these different wedges with a color correspond with a food group that's classified in the Eat Lancet diet. And that orange circle, that marks 100% of the food system boundary. So for those wedges that are within that orange circle, that's within the food system boundary. It's like, great, keep going. We can even consume more of that. For those wedges that are way outside, where we have beef, lamb, and pork, potatoes and tubers, eggs, chicken, dairy, those are outside of the planetary system boundary, meaning that we're overproducing beyond what the planet can accommodate, what the environment can accommodate for us. So this visual from the Eat Lancet Commission would indicate that North America has swayed really heavily on the animal source protein. This is in contrast to what we see in Sub-Saharan Africa using these same analyses, where all of those animal source proteins are within or well under what the planetary system boundary is, except for potatoes and tubers, much of which falls into this category includes cassava, yams, sweet potatoes, and those sorts of tubers that are more locally available. So we also covered what comprises the Planetary Health Diet, but the key takeaway from here is that it is a radical shift toward plant protein with limited emphasis on meats. You can see that represented by half the plate being vegetables. Just the blue and red up here are those animal source foods. And it also looks a bit like the MyPlate diagram for those of you who are familiar with the USDA MyPlate. However, MyPlate doesn't take into account the environment. So we get an even bigger shift toward plant protein here than we do with MyPlate. And each of these food groups are also associated with a precise number or range of grams per day to be consumed. For example, whole grains, we should consume, oh, sorry about that. Okay, whole grains, 232 grams per day. Tubers, 50 grams per day. And those are also corresponding with a calorie amount. So how many of our calories should come from that food group? For example, 811 calories from whole grains per day. And all of these calories add up to 2,500 per day. That was the benchmark that the Eat Lancet Commission chose to use based on the activity level of a young, healthy individual. And you'll notice that when we add these up, 86% of the calories come from plants. So this is the overwhelming majority of where the energy comes from, whereas only 14% of calories come from those animal source foods. So only 340 calories per day under this diet should be from an animal source. So this raises some questions in terms of, can we actually get all of our nutrients when we're consuming 86% of our calories from plants? What about nutrients that might be found only in animal source foods? And so this is exactly the question that was explored by Ty Beal and his team in the literature, and you'll get to hear from him next week. But just as a teaser, he examined this Eat Lancet diet with a custom compiled database of foods from around the world and posed the question of, is this diet sufficient or adequate in the 6 priority micronutrients that are typically at risk for people around the world, or the most deficient. And this shows that vitamin B12, calcium, iron, and zinc were all inadequate when using this analysis, specifically and more so for women of reproductive age who have higher requirements based on the needs of those minerals for childbearing. Additionally, diets that are very high in plant proteins have lots of phytates. Phytates are anti-nutrients which can inhibit the absorption of minerals in our guts. So not only do we have a reduced amount of iron, calcium, zinc intake, but also a lot of things fighting against our body actually being able to use those minerals. So these are a couple dynamics at play with a diet that's very high in plant protein. So this led me to my question, is finding this Beal paper quite interesting and wanting to look at this for a specific region. So for my thesis, I posed the question of, is the Planetary Health Diet nutritionally adequate when applied to West Africa? And of note, the data source that I used to think about foods that are commonly consumed in West Africa was the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization's food composition tables for Western Africa. And these tables are similar to what you might find in Food Data Central if you were to go on to the USDA website and query like how many grams of carbohydrates in a carrot. Like it's a similar sort of a database. There's over 1,000 foods that are local and commonly consumed. It includes a lot of indigenous foods for the West African region. And so my study was the first one to leverage exclusively one of these food and agriculture databases to test the question of this planetary health diet claiming to be universal. Everyone should be eating these specific amounts of these specific food groups. But however, the way that we eat those foods or the foods that we're eating to fill those food groups could vary drastically from region to region. So therefore, the nutrient content could also vary. So here's how I went about, just a little step-by-step, was first I took this database and then assigned every single food in the database an Eat Lancet food category. So I followed the categorization scheme and I excluded all the foods that didn't fit nicely into one of those categories because they aren't included in the Planetary Health Diet. Then I also was interested in this question of protein. So Beal only looked at priority micronutrients, but we're also interested in, is it adequate in protein given that it's a high amount of calories come from plants? And with protein, there is a difference in quality between animal protein and plant protein. You may have heard of high quality, low quality, but this is measured through one score called PDCAS, which adjusts for the digestibility of protein. So for example, peanuts might have a lower amount of the protein in a peanut that's actually absorbed to be used by our bodies, whereas milk, almost all of the protein is absorbed in our digestive tract to be used. So this is also something to take into account when we think about adequacy or sufficiency in our own bodies. So I also added a new variable for PDCAS for each of these different food groups. Then from there, I took the median value from the group for each nutrient, for each category, and then I multiplied those medians by the number of grams per day that was allotted in the Eat Lancet Planetary Health Diet. So for example, the database says there's 25.8 grams of protein per 100 grams of beef and lamb. So everything is by 100 grams, but the Planetary Health Diet only says we can consume 7 grams of beef and lamb. So then I multiplied that by 7 to get 1.8 grams of protein. So in this, for example, we only have 1.8 grams of protein coming from our beef and lamb source. I added up all those different protein sources from each of the different categories to get the total, just to give you a sense of how I came about these calculations. So what did I find? First of all, the total energy based on the West Africa Food Database matches that in the Planetary Health Diet. So the Planetary Health Diet was 2,500, got 2,516, so we're very close, and that adds a significant validity to the result, saying that this is basically the same amount of food that's being taken in, and we can look at the differences and nuances between those two. Of note, 88% of those calories came from plant sources, which is very similar to the 86% that came from plant sources in the Planetary Health Diet original. Additionally, when looking at protein was adequate based on the nutrient reference value from the FAO saying adults need 50 grams of protein generally per day. We came up with 87 grams of protein. 31% of those came from animal sources and 69% from plant sources. So when we think about the plant-animal protein ratios that Adam showed previously, we're kind of at that 30-70 sort of a ratio. Then I tested the adjusted protein. So this is the protein that is going to be digested based on our estimates. And that brought the protein level down to 62 grams. So that's the estimate of per day. We're digesting and metabolizing 62 grams of protein. You'll notice that a higher percentage of those are from animal sources because more animal source protein is digested than plant source. So overall, the key takeaway is that protein is adequate, but also remembering this is for 2,500 calories. Many of us don't eat that many calories in a day, so therefore our protein intake would also be less under this. So we want to make sure that it would still be adequate with a lower calorie diet. When looking at micronutrients, the key takeaway is that not all of them were adequate based on the West Africa Food Database. So this corroborates with Ty Beale's findings as well. So compared to the FAO Codex nutrient reference values, we see that zinc, calcium, and vitamin A were all inadequate by varying degrees. Though folate, iron, and vitamin B12 were all adequate. So the nutrients that we found to be adequate were slightly different than those that Beale found to be adequate. However, we were similar in the fact that they're not all adequate, and there's some major, it poses major risks for deficiency for like the long-term consumption of this planetary health diet. So instead of just like leaving it there and saying, okay, well, it's inadequate, we decided to propose some adjustments to the planetary health diet in order to make it more nutritionally adequate for based on the West African Food Database. So we went about determining which of those food groups were the most nutrient-rich using the nutrient-rich food index that ranked all of our different food groups based on this is the most nutritionally dense all the way down to there's basically no nutrients in this food group. And so we decided to increase the amount of beef and lamb liver, chicken liver, small dried fish, and then dry beans, lentils, and pulses. So liver is incredibly rich in particularly vitamin A because that's where it's stored in our body. And additionally, small dried fish is rich in calcium from bones that are oftentimes in the fish. So these often overlooked foods could be really key to improving deficiency of micronutrients in these contexts. So we experimented with adding those in to this diet. However, in order to just like maintain the calorie balance and not just say, oh, let's add all these foods into our diet, but then not take any out, we wanted to also remove those that were less nutrient dense, including whole grains and tree nuts. So under this new revised planetary health diet, we show that it is nutritionally adequate. And so you'll see the brown bars here are before we made the adjustments, and then the green bars indicate what the new level of micronutrients is after we made these adjustments of adding the liver, small dried fish, and increasing the beans and lentils. So every micronutrient is adequate here. Additionally, we remained within that 2,500 calorie range and also increased the protein level significantly with the increase of fish and with beans up to 98 grams of protein and then 72 for that adjusted for digestibility number. So overall, with these small tweaks to the planetary health diet, we showed that it is more protein or higher in protein and more micronutrient sufficient in all these priority micronutrients. So these are some important findings for the Eat Lancet Commission and even things that we would propose. So key takeaways here is that the current version of the planetary health diet may not meet all of the micronutrient needs for those consuming foods in West Africa based on just the general medians of our findings. Additionally, that the diet quality can improve with inclusion of small nutrient-dense foods. And this might be an area through which the Eat Lancet Commission could consider how do we want to scale up the consumption or the promotion of these nutrient-rich foods if we're really going after targeting a micronutrient deficiency. It could also be an area in which they question the sustainability of using these small food categories of micronutrient-rich foods and whether that would fit within their schema for the planetary boundaries. And then finally, animal source foods are going to remain key sources of micronutrients and protein for those living in West Africa. And it's important to bring this back to the slide where we showed like the low income and protein consumption and trending all the way up to high income, high protein consumption. The Eat Lancet's somewhere in the middle here. So the messaging to high-income countries may be, okay, we got to rein in the protein consumption, whereas the messaging to those countries that maybe aren't consuming, on average, enough protein, the message has to be different. It has to be, how do we increase protein in these contexts, too? So that brings us to the end of my thesis findings, but I did just want to take a moment to provide some background on my journey to even getting to this place to even want to ask these questions. And it started when I was sitting in your seats as an undergraduate, hearing for the first time really about the inequities of food insecurity around the world and just the struggle that so many people go through because of the systems and the structures that have been set up that make it their whole lives about, how do I get enough food for myself and my family, and not even maybe even getting to the question of, is it nutritionally adequate, but just how do I get enough? And so that led me to an opportunity to do some research on breastfeeding in Kenya with a professor who had just won a grant at the university that I went to. And I got to travel to Kenya and firsthand do surveys and interviews to understand a little bit more about what it's like to live there and the challenges for mothers to get enough food to then feed their babies as well. And then also had the opportunity to do an internship abroad for my degree in Senegal. And there I was interning with a community health organization that worked with people living with HIV and AIDS. And one of the treats that I got to participate in was a community nutrition education program. And so this is me and my colleague Rose, who were talking just basics about dietary diversity in a schoolhouse in a village in Senegal. And it was fun to think about how we were just getting to talk about, consuming different foods have different properties and different qualities, and similar to how we're talking about the different food groups of the Eat Lancet, but we were, simplifying and how that can pose, just a radical change in the way people think about what food they're eating and why. So all of this research really excited me about getting to be part of program policies that are really working to make the global food system more equitable, more nutritious for everyone. And so that's why I'm just thrilled to be here at the University of Washington, getting to study that, getting to work with Adam, and getting to be with you all today. So thank you so much. And I would love to take any questions that you have.
So it all comes down to liver and spinach.
Liver and spinach, yeah. Who has eaten liver before? Has anyone eaten liver? Oh, more than I was expecting. Okay.
Interesting. I went
Yeah.
to the QFC, actually inspired by your slides, and looked for chicken livers. I couldn't find any.
No chicken liver at QFC, so it's a larger food system issue potentially, needing to source liver. Yeah.
Small fish, you can get sardines.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually trying sardines and chicken liver. I found sardines, but no chicken liver.
Yeah.
And I did not go towards scale. I'm sorry.
Question here?
How much are these findings impacted by the types of foods that they eat in West Africa as compared to the types of foods that we eat in the high-income countries? In terms of you need to do more or less of this, how can we compare those results with how that would change recommendations for how we eat here?
That's an excellent question, and that's going to vary significantly by context. So important to note is that in the Lancet Commission, they did not do or provide any sort of analysis on micronutrients. So we can't say, well, in the reference diet that they used, it was sufficient in everything, but here's the difference in a different context. So that's one thing, but it would be interesting if they did provide that. It would depend on which database is being used and the methodology. So for example, if you wanted to look at, on average, like what we eat in America, like those sorts of surveys, those databases, you could apply the same methodology that I used and then compare and contrast and say, well, on average, the whole grains that we're eating are maybe much less rich in protein, so then protein's way lower in this context than West Africa. The grains are higher in protein. So that's kind of the one difference that I'm seeing. Also important to note that this is an extremely heterogeneous food database. And so West Africa is certainly not one cuisine or one type of food. Different countries have different cuisines, different people, preferences vary within households, within ethnicities, all sorts of variation. So even us putting that big blanket statement on it doesn't necessarily get to the nuances, but the same methodology could be applied depending on what foods you're looking at. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so what you're saying is that there's more work that needs to be done by the Lancet perspective in order to be able to compare apples to apples and see what recommendations would come out of that for people in high income.
Exactly. To make a universal claim. But this also has been applied in some European countries who have modeled their dietary guidelines for their country off of the Eat Lancet diet. So I bet there is some analysis out there as they're understanding, well, is this actually nutrient sufficient? Because we're recommending this as like a nutrition guideline. However, it's really coming out of a space of being more of a climate planetary health guideline.
And I have one more follow-up question.
Sure.
How does what's best for the planet align with what's best for human health?
That is the tension. That you could do a PhD on that and more, I'm sure. So that's the goal that this planetary health diet is trying to balance, is saying maybe we can't achieve all of the nutrients perfectly, but we're doing so within the planetary boundaries. And so that's really important too. So if you dig into the report, they have 6 different indicators for the planet, and they got to rein those in while also maintaining a healthy diet. Another thing they're looking at, in addition to just nutrients adequacy, is also prevention of chronic diseases. So they're holding back on things that have shown to be associated with heart disease or with diabetes or chronic kidney disease. And so that's just another factor that's layered into this already kind of messy question. Yeah, thanks for the questions. Yeah, Morgan.
So I was wondering, you mentioned at the beginning that the diet, the original One Lancet diet, wasn't adequate for women of childbearing age. So your revised one, is this specifically for women of childbearing age, or is it kind of like a blanket for adults?
Yeah, excellent question. I don't know if I can go back to that. I can. So you're referring to this graph. So you'll see the dark green is for women of childbearing age, whereas the light green is for adults 25 years and older. And so the reference values that we used in our study are more similar to that of the adults in the light green. Whereas, yeah, we didn't do the analysis for women of childbearing age, but that could be an easy next step too.
You made recommendations for nutrient-rich foods for West Africa. Would you have different recommendations for us in the United States, or would you still have those same recommendations?
That's an excellent question, and it would depend on what the database is that we're evaluating, and then which nutrients are adequate or inadequate. So for example, if calcium is adequate because we fortify all of our milk and so that shows up differently, then small dried fish might not be a recommendation. Similarly with vitamin A, if carrots really show up with prominence or something like that to make it more sufficient. So, but there might be different deficiencies. So for iron, for example, then the recommendation might be different. So it would really depend on the database. Yeah, Ty Beal actually wrote a paper on this where he was just generally looking at different foods around the world to find like which are the most nutrient-dense foods in priority micronutrients. So maybe Adam can link to that paper. We can discuss it. But that's one that I based my food groups on to look at, okay, what are his top 5 in addition to doing that with my own data to see what those nutrient-rich foods are. So if you're looking for like the superfoods of the world, they're out there.
Superfoods for the world. Mm-hmm. Hannah was using the West Africa database because was specifically interested in foods available in the West African context, and that came from FAO, and that does include foods commonly consumed in Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and there's one more.
There is one more, at least, yes. Mm-hmm.
Have you considered any other options or changes we can do to make it more affordable and possible for people in lower and middle income countries?
That's an excellent question. And when I first showed that slide of what could potentially be eaten in one day, I mean, I haven't done the costing on that, but if you go into like Safeway, that's going to add up to like, $20 at least per day, which is, I'm sure, out of our budgets when we're living on top ramen and peanut butter sandwiches here. So that's an excellent point if we had cost data for all of these foods. However, that's tricky to get because it fluctuates frequently. It's really location dependent. I mean, you could just do that study in Seattle and spend your whole year just going around to figure out what each of these different foods cost to create a database. So it's super time intensive. But you're absolutely right in that it's not an affordable diet for most of the world. Specifically, West Africa, there is a study that showed majority of the countries, over 80%, I want to say, of people could not afford the Planetary Health Diet in that context because they did do some costing estimates about what it would be on average per day. So it's a huge gap. And also another challenge, we talk about human health, we talk about environmental health, but there's this whole other bucket of, well, what's affordable and how do we make it affordable without exploiting people and the environment and ourselves? So it's a huge challenge in food systems. Yeah, thank you.
Your reflections for the coming week. Go ahead.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. All right. Yes. Okay, great. Fantastic. Okay, so I want to show you slides which talk about some of the issues with the Eat Lancet diet that have come up in terms of criticisms. The first issue that came up, and came from Italy, and WHO was that this was a single unitary diet for the entire planet. So if I go back to my previous slide showing the diversity of different diets based on socioeconomic status of different countries, what the Eat Lancet diet was trying to do is to put everyone at the same level of 70% plant protein, 30% animal protein, regardless of region, geography, culture, tradition, and so on. So one of the criticisms acknowledged by the Lancet commissioners, especially Jess Fanza, was that the territoriality or the regional diversity of diets was not fully taken into account. So code that under social aspects of the Planetary Health Diet were not really there. The second issue that came up was, exactly as Grishma mentioned, it was not affordable. There was an attempt to look at global diet prices, and the attempt was made by the International Food Policy Research Institute in DC. They do a lot of work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They work with the World Bank, and they are in a position to get global prices. So what they figured out was that the median cost of the Eat Lancet diet, largely actually because of the vegetables, which are not cheap, was about $2.34 per day, but the global poverty line was $1.90. So as a result, an estimated 1.58 billion people could not afford the Planetary Health Diet. So the second issue was affordability. I was invited to make a small comment about that because I was asked to comment on the initial paper from IFPRI, and I said, well, this is the first attempt to look at cost. And I think there should be more attempts to look at cost, especially cost in West Africa and cost in North America and elsewhere, because data on prices of food are not readily available. So the first criticism was the lack of regional diversity. The second criticism was about affordability. And the third criticism is something that Hannah already dealt with. And this was the initial paper of, there are two papers by Ty Beal, Flaminia Ortenzi, and this one is Jeff Fanzo. Is the Eat Lancet diet, in fact, inadequate in priority micronutrients, and what can be done about it? So his priority micronutrients are slightly different from ours, but basically we agree that the diet is not what it could be, and it needs to be improved by small tweaks. So, your reflection. Again, we're posing a question. Planetary Health Diet, yes or no? What are the chances that the Planetary Health Diet will be adopted by low and middle income countries? Because those are the ones at risk for malnutrition still. Give some reasons for your answer. Half a page max. That's it. That's your reflection. And then Ty Beal is the speaker next week. He'll be remote on Zoom, but live. And his readings have already been posted. And I think we just got his slides, and he will be here in person, live on Zoom on a big screen. So thank you all. See you next week.